I would describe the album as a versatile, exuberant, colorful album with a mix of many different styles of music and all in connection to folk music. So kind of showing the connection of the recorder of my instrument with folk music. We ended up with this collection of pieces. It seems now to me like a very small selection of everything that's possible, because it was kind of an impossible task to capture all this music in one album because it's so versatile. But I tried to include as many different styles as possible. I wanted to work together with bandoneon for the piazzolla, with cymbal for Bartók. So there's many different sound colors on the album. I grew up in the Netherlands, Amsterdam is my hometown. And I was already into music as a child very much. I think my parents realized that I had this need of expression all the time, whether it was through music or through inventing little plays or dressing up or singing. So music for me was always a means of expression, I think. So the recording process of the jazz pieces was a lot of fun. It was great to work with the musicians of Fuse because they come from jazz backgrounds, so they could really help me out with the style and making sure that I was kind of... I mean, it's of course impossible to become a jazz musician in just the preparation of one album, but I feel like I at least got a good feeling for the music, and it was kind of a collaborative effort together with them to make it as jazzy as possible. So it was a fantastic experience to work with all these different musicians on the album. Both kind of the musicians of the ensemble, so Ensemble Ludwig and Ensemble Fuse. They all brought their own individuality into the music, and it was very inspiring to also kind of feed off of them for many of the pieces. For example, the violinist from Ensemble Ludwig, Emmy Storms, has a lot of experience with playing Celtic folk music, so she really helped me with finding the natural kind of ornaments that fit to this style. And of course the musicians of Fuse helped me with the jazz tracks a lot. And the bandoneon player, Karel Krijnhof, is an expert on tango style and playing piazzolla's music, so he was very specific about where the accents should be and what the spirit of this music is. So it was very helpful to have all these strong musicians with a strong opinion also on the album. I think in every single piece on this album there was a challenge, so it would be hard to say what was the most challenging piece to record. I think often when you think about the most simple melody, it can seem like, oh, that must have been easy to record, but actually usually the more simple the music sounds, the more complicated it is to capture it in one take, because you want to have exactly the right character for kind of a simple melody. So it might even be more complicated to record the more simple music, so to say. I think the most fun to record were probably the jazz tracks, because they were scheduled for the last day of recording. So mentally already, of course, we had done the most difficult part, and it was more about just enjoying the music together. For many of the pieces on the album we actually used complete takes, because the tracks themselves are relatively short, so it was possible to just do a lot of complete takes and really also work on the music in the studio together to get the character right. So that was a really fun way of recording, because it gives you the feeling that you're actually making music and it's not like a static process of like recording short bits and then you don't have an overview anymore of the music. So the preparation process for this album was very extensive because of the variety of styles, and I wanted to make sure that I really immerse myself in all the different styles before I take on the challenge of kind of making them my own. And a large part of the process, of course, was also preparing the different arrangements of the pieces. And in many cases, I know my own instrument very well, so I had to kind of advise the arrangers on how to use it and in what setting and which range of the recorder and which type of recorder. So it was there was a lot of preparation behind it. So the reason I was interested in exploring in this album the connection of folk music with my instrument is because it's actually a very natural connection. The recorder in its shape has remained in its original form because it was never modified into an orchestra instrument like the flute, or many instruments were kind of changed in order to fit into an orchestra setting. But the recorder in some sense has a kind of very authentic quality to it, and in a way also simple, because the build of the instrument is relatively simple. And what was very interesting to me is that I encountered in the concerts that I gave in many different cultures, people came to me with an instrument that was a folk music instrument of their culture, which ended up being very similar to the recorder. So in many different cultures there are kind of flute-like instruments that actually are very similar to the recorder. For example, when I played at a festival in Corsica, someone brought to me this pifana course, which is kind of like flute, Corsican flute, which was made out of a goat's horn. But the labium and the kind of sound production system was exactly the same as the recorder. And I had the same experience in Japan and also in Canada with instruments that were brought to me by people from the audience who were saying, oh, would you be interested in trying out this instrument? And it would be kind of a folk music instrument that was in build and in structure very similar to the recorder. So that also shows the very clear connection of the recorder to folk music from different cultures. So I got into music at a very young age. I think I was 5 years old when I started having recorder lessons and also singing in a children's choir. I guess music was always around, also because my parents are musicians as well, so there was always music in the house. So for me it felt very natural to start learning an instrument. So for myself, I actually never considered music making a career somehow, because it has never felt to me like a job. I mean, in some instances, of course, it feels like a job when I have to do hard, difficult emails or spend hours on my laptop. But if I'm making music, I usually forget that it's a job because it just feels like I'm doing it out of passion. But I guess I grew up around a lot of people who were professional musicians, so I always had this sense of like, okay, it's normal to do this as a job. So I was never surprised that it could be a career. So I think in the first place, what drew me to the recorder was the originality of the instrument, the fact that not a lot of people in my surroundings were playing it. So it felt like I could really use this instrument to develop it as my own personal skill and to also develop my own personal sound on the instrument. And I think the reason I stuck with the recorder was because I had this personal connection with the sound that I was making on the instrument. So it felt like I wanted to keep improving the way I was playing this instrument because it felt like it had become my own voice almost. To unwind after a concert, I probably take a bath in my hotel room, which is one of my favorite things. I mean, taking baths is yeah, I love taking baths. Or having a nice meal, or drinking alcohol, of course. That's the moment where I can kind of let go of the focus and of the pressure. After a performance is always the best moment.
Just have a glass of wine in the bar.
A glass of wine with some snacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Ooh.
Perfect.
Yeah, that feels like the diva moment, you know? Yeah. Usually I don't listen to the music that I'm performing at the moment. I don't listen to recordings of the music because usually when I'm getting ready to perform something, it becomes really my own thing and I have very strong opinions on it. So it's difficult then to listen to a recording of someone else. So I usually actually listen to maybe even different styles of music. When I'm preparing a Baroque piece, I'm listening to Adele, or I'm a big fan of Amy Winehouse, kind of a lot of female artists. Also jazz music I listen to a lot to unwind. But of course I love listening to albums, but then it's more kind of a professional way of listening. So then I would really kind of take the time and sit down and just focus on the recording.